Hey, welcome back to the FuturePrint virtual conference. This next session is called Inside the Tornado, the Opportunity for Inkjet. I'm joined by Dave Gray from Ricoh Europe. Hello. And Dave Varty from Ricoh Europe. Between them, many years experience with Inkjet, it's fair to say. So that breadth of experience from the analog to the digital transition. So I guess between you've seen a few revolutions in your time. Is that fair to say?
Evolutions, I think, rather than revolutions.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, I started off at the beginning of a career of putting ink on things, and I find myself 46 years later still putting ink on things. So from that point of view,
lead.
Yeah, I did start with lead. I was a compositor, but the technology has changed, but the end product hasn't. And I think that's been instrumental in what we've done. And what we do now is it's led by the end product. It's not a case of trying to shoehorn a technology into a particular application because we've got ownership of that technology. It's actually about working backwards from the product and what's the best way to produce it. Best meaning technical and commercial economic value to it. So a lot of what we do, I guess, the business card title, I've got a number of variants. So certainly Inkjet Evangelist is one that I'm proud of because that's the current technology and that's what I work with. But I think Transition Manager would probably describe best what we actually do, is looking how do we help people get from where they are to where they want to be. And that may sound simple, but the two requirements of that is, first of all, you have to understand where you are. And secondly, you have to have a pretty good understanding of where you want to be, because without those two things, you can't do an effective transition. And I guess what you alluded to there, we are in the team that I work within, we've all come from backgrounds in other technologies. So we're quite well poised to understand where customers are now. And we understand the technology of Inkjet, so we're in a position to help people along that journey. It's one we've done before, from analog to digital. And we say to customers, don't make the same mistakes we've made. Learn from our mistakes, and then go make new mistakes and learn from that as well. That's a very Western philosophy of acceptance. It's okay to make mistakes. It's even better to learn from those mistakes and move forward. So I guess, yeah, we're in the market of transition and transition towards Inkjet where it's appropriate.
And both of you work very much focused more on new markets for Inkjet, so industrial, what you might call industrial markets. And Dave Varty, I guess you work across a lot of different industries, so you started to see changes by the discussions you've had, particularly over the period of the past year. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think, we're talking about the tornado, which is Geoffrey Moore's theories. Crossing the chasm could be done individually or it could be done collectively. And I think, or my perception now, is that there is a complete understanding of the merits of digital from analog. And what that does is opens up all sorts of opportunities. And my role is slightly different from Dave, is that we see adoption within automotive, coatings, concrete printing, modules, food, inline packaging, and decor. Decor is the big one at the moment. And what that means is that people aren't crossing the chasm individually. We're crossing it as a collective business. So for me, the big change has been that it's turned into a much more strategic transition. The word discontinuous was used, but the majority of the conversations that I'm having now are with CEOs, senior sales, R&D directors. Whereas for the last 4 or 5 years, it was traditionally research. It was people bottom up rather than top down. And I think there's, I don't want to use the word perfect storm, because that, if anybody's seen the film, didn't actually turn out quite right. But we've got a lot of things going on, and it's not something that Geoffrey Moore really talked about in the tornado. He talked about the bowling alley, where you moved from that beachhead into finding your own position within markets. The single pin, if anybody's been bowling, the single pin at the front, and then how do you knock down the other 9 pins, or however many pins there are. But we've got loads of things thrown into the mix at the same time. We've got Brexit, we've got travel bans, even climate change going on around us. And that kind of throws a lot more emphasis into the people who are leading the business rather than the people who are researching the business. And for me, that's made a big change. And I've had more connections in the last 12 months than I think I had in the previous 3 years. Yeah, and they're coming from the top level. People who they need liquidity in the business. They need to find something that engages with their customers. But often these companies are the end user themselves, huge industrial companies, people that don't get involved with print, or let's say print is not the end result. Print is part of a process.
So the dialogue's changed. Dave Greg, we talked before about some of the things that you've seen change. We'll come back to the tornado, but preceding, or what's perhaps causing the tornado, sometimes new ideas in innovation, the timing's wrong.
People don't like change. It's a very human instinct not to change. You like to maintain the status quo. Change has an element of risk in it. It has an element of work involved in it. And a lot of people work on the basis, well, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. It's so much easier to do nothing than it is to do something. The changes that are going on now, as Dave alludes to, there are so many of them, and they've been forced on industry and society. Nobody chose to have this change. And so much has changed that 12 months ago we would never have considered possible. One of the things in transition management is getting an acceptance that change is necessary. That's actually quite a hard bit of the process, is persuading people that they need to change. To some extent, the crisis in the world has forced change upon people, whether they wanted it or not. And it's also forced it on everybody. It's forced it on your competitors, most domestic and international. So everybody's in the same boat. Change is now not an option. It's actually part of everything we do. So once you get over that hurdle that some sort of change is going to take place, you then start to look at, is it temporary? Is it permanent? Is this, and people were immediately looking for a new norm. People like a norm. They want normal. They don't want a state of flux. They want to settle it back down. So they're going through this phase of, they're disturbed, they're unsettled because it's changing around them. And they're desperately looking for something to hang on to and to stabilize. It's like being swept along in a flood. You grab hold of everything and anything in order to survive. But it's given business leaders an opportunity to step back and say, okay, change has taken place. What can we make of this? What can we do? What can we capitalize on? And what do we need to do to come out of this stronger and better? Not just stronger and better than we were, but stronger and better than our competition. We've talked previously about the opportunity for a post-COVID Klondike. Everything's up for grabs. Brand loyalty has gone by the board. Conventional distribution channels don't exist anymore. Not just that they've changed, but they just don't exist. The high street's been decimated and won't come back in the same form. So there's going to be a new normalization, but it's an opportunity for businesses as well to say, you know what, if we didn't do anything, are we going to be competitive? Are we going to be able to crawl out of this? Because everybody, whether it's individual, company, even at country level, has taken such a financial knock and a debenture on this that they've got to repay it somewhere along the way. And how are they going to do that? Well, they've got to trade out of it. Whether it's an individual business or a country, we've got to trade out of the debts that have racked up. And so people are looking to say, right, what's the smart way of equipping ourselves for the new world? Step back from that and say, what is the new world? What's it going to look like? And the one thing that hasn't changed is demand. At the end of the line, customers have still consumed. What they've consumed has changed, what brands have changed, what distribution channels they use have changed, but people have still consumed at a fairly steady rate in most things. Apart from that blip at the beginning for toilet rolls and pasta, actually the supermarkets haven't gone out of stock. In some respects, if you like, Brexit has been more of a challenge to pasta supplies than COVID has been. So it is an opportunity to say, okay, we can get a taste of what's going to happen. Customers are still going to be there. Print is still going to be bought. Decorated items are still going to be bought. What's the best way of doing that? Do we go back to the way we were doing it before we locked down? Or do we use this opportunity to review our technical processes? The end user may not see a change. I mean, we've seen this, I've seen it recently in the wallpaper industry. We've moved from analog to digital in that market, and it's an ongoing transition. The end user, apart from being offered a product that is has a few extra features, usual things of digital, repeat length and short runs, actually the product hasn't changed at all. You still pick it up and it's a roll of vinyl wallpaper. It still goes on the wall the same, it still looks the same, it still lasts the same. But it was produced using a different technology. And the end user doesn't care how it's produced. So we see this as we see more and more now. David sees CEOs and CTOs. I'm seeing CFOs coming to the table and saying, can we look at the economics first? Because if it doesn't stack up financially, we're not going to change. And if it does stack up financially and the product quality is at least equal to what we were doing in analog, let's do it. Sometimes they don't even want to see the machine. It's not of an interest to them at all. They just, if it doesn't stack up on a spreadsheet, it doesn't matter what color we paint the machine, it's not right for them. So we're doing more and more business case modeling for them and total cost of ownership. And companies are taking a longer, slightly more pragmatic view to it, getting less emotional about the technology and more practical about the finances to it all.
So it sounds like all of a very, good sort of explanation of how things have changed and so on and so forth, and that, like Dave, you were saying, you don't like to use the word perfect storm, but it's like the stars are perhaps starting to align for Inkjet in the new world that is emerging after COVID, in terms of companies are starting to actually have a more of a forensic understanding of making an investment that 12 months ago they wouldn't have done. You started talking about the tornado, and the chasm usually, I guess, is it's a difficult thing to cross, isn't it? It's not something that's necessarily easy. Am I right in assuming, therefore, Inkjet in most of these markets has crossed the chasm now, and that you're in that sort of early phase of that tornado where people have accepted the technology, but it's now about how to invest, where to invest. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think for me, there is an acceptance that Inkjet is a viable alternative. So if you take the analog to digital as a whole, then there is an acceptance that happens. And there are some examples of mature markets like ceramics and apparel, textiles, and they've proven that there is an opportunity. There will always be new opportunities coming through, looking for the examples, but they can now reference something. They can now say, well, actually, that company, and I'm looking here at something like coatings or automotive, where there are points that they can go back to. We've still got printed electronics, we've still got industrial applications, things like that, which are unique and innovative, but they understand that there is a route forward. And I think the benefits are generally accepted because they transfer across all industries. As Dave said, there are benefits that are unique to the decor market, repeat lengths and things like that, which are not directly transferable, but the ability to be able to print short run, on demand, to shorten the supply chain, to be able to reduce stock, and all the capital that's tied up in those. They work for every industry. And I think the industrial business has been working hard behind the scenes to try and work out their own business propositions in terms of supply chain and disruption that I mentioned before. The other thing that is quite interesting, when you talk to these companies, and some of these are major multinationals that want to incorporate inkjet into their manufacturing or design or internal processes. And I'm talking possibility of sand molding or inline packaging. These are not things that we conventionally think of as printing. The major companies have been saying, well, we've had a bad year, and Dave will know where I'm coming from on this one as well. If you're going to have a bad year, have a really bad year. And then, so make the investments now. And then when you get to the point where we have that Klondike moment, you've got the investments. You can move forward rapidly, and you can take the lead. And this goes back to the tornado and the bowling alley. You become the de facto standard, VHS or Sony. If you can create that standard whilst you're having a bad year, just imagine what you're going to do when you have a good year. And that's what we're all hoping for this time now.
We're also being told that the future is still uncertain. Even at this stage with vaccine and Brexit over, people still can't predict what the world's going to look like in 6 months. So whatever they invest in now, and investment's a great time because actually interest rates have never been lower and they're not likely to go up anytime soon. So it's a perfect time to invest. But what you invest in you don't want to invest in white elephants. So you've got to maintain a degree of flexibility and adaptability in your investments. So hard and fast dedicated production lines aren't perhaps the best way forward. Systems that are modular and flexible and can be repurposed and changed on a moment's notice will give you that ability to as the future changes and settles down, then you can fine tune your offering to the market. We've seen at the moment that worldwide, what are the constraints and limitations people have got for getting product into the country at the moment? It's a shortage of containers. It's nothing to do with the product. It's containers that are affecting it. Who'd have thought that 12 months ago? It's a shortage of packaging. And so onshoring the packaging of the product seems to be a smart way of moving. We're seeing the what's being printed changed. So forget the long commercial runs. There's no more IKEA catalogue. There's no more Argos catalogue. They've printed their last ever paper versions of that. They've gone digital on that. So where is print still going? Because people who are printers, if that's their profession, are looking for, well, if I'm not going to be doing commercial print, what am I going to be printing? So they're looking at alternative products to print. You're looking at press manufacturers saying, well, if we're not going to be making analog presses anymore, we're metal bashers. What are we going to build for the future? So all of the major analog press manufacturers are investing or partnering with digital partners to produce off-the-shelf solutions for people. Flexible packaging is an obvious one. There's really interesting relationships developing between traditional press manufacturers and traditional digital printer manufacturers. But then you go even further. You go down to the specialist companies who don't even think of it as printing. They're decorating their product. They may not even call it printing. And they're looking at how do we continuously improve our product out. When a customer picks up an iPhone and with a decorated color on it, the word print never comes into it. When you go to the showroom and buy, days you can still go to showrooms, when you buy your new car and it's got an instrument cluster on there, you don't say, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how they printed that. You just accept it's an instrument cluster and you look at it and you use it, but you don't question how it was produced. And so people like that, and certainly automotive, aeronautic, all of these industries, which have traditionally worked on a just-in-time supply model and have been struggling recently, are onshoring a lot of their manufacturing processes, because just-in-time only works where you have uninterrupted supply lines. And so people are saying disruption of the supply chain has really caused commercial losses. And to mitigate those losses, people are now looking to see, how do I print closer to where I manufacture? How do I not even print, but how do I decorate components?
And that's where the tornado thing really, as you've touched on as well, is where it becomes an economic discussion, and where the economic factors are so adverse that actually it's forcing people to have these economic discussions, which suggests to me that, in Geoffrey Moore's term, it's Inkjet's moving into the bowling alley, which means it's starting to become a mainstream technology option for a lot of these perhaps previously resistant industries. So the discussions you're having, David, with these big multinational brands that you wouldn't necessarily think that you wouldn't have had that discourse with before, right?
Yeah, we're fortunate, obviously being Ricoh, that we have connections with many major global brands who are looking at how they can transition pharmaceutical, automotive, petrochemical. But I think I agree with what Dave said. Reshoring or onshoring has been really highlighted with the lack of containers and the Brexit issues and things like that. So there's a demand for the supply chain to be as robust as it was, but you can only do that if you bring it closer to the end user. The other thing that I would like to just put forward is that the print industry, or however you define it, the inkjet industry, doesn't exist in isolation. And we've had a huge amount of social and political change in the last year, 2 years, maybe. I don't want to mention names, but all of the embargoes and the changes in tax levies and for imports and exports, that has to have a knock-on effect. And if you have to pay more for a product and then it takes longer to get a product, you need to be more efficient in the way that you work. And we saw that, I think it was Honda, who had to close their manufacturing lines down because they couldn't get engine components or whatever. It's the same. Every industry has the same constraints. So the inkjet business lends itself to a much more amenable process. And as you say, within manufacturers, that means that they need to be able to do it in line at the point of production, most efficient. And we're seeing transitions as well, where certain markets are combining between label and packaging and coding and marking. So coding and marking can now be done in multiple colors. Direct to shape is looming at some point. It's not there yet. That's one that hasn't crossed the chasm completely. In a production line, there are still some very clever people out there doing cylindrical objects. But you've got merging businesses, merging technologies, which all lend itself to efficiency. And the efficiency is where as Dave said, the CFOs come in and the CEOs, if you like, because they're more interested in what technology can do for them rather than what technology does. And
that's sort of moving on to my next question is how do you guys work with? So you've got somebody who's interested. They're economically driven now. They've kind of the technical walls to adoption have started to be dismantled, partly because the technical people are not necessarily the only part of the discussion now. How do you work with them then? I mean, because we're kind of into the last few minutes of the discussion. How do you guys help, or Ricoh? How do you help a company adopt digital?
Effectively become unpaid consultants for them. We look at what they're doing now and try and understand their product and their process, and quite often they're areas that are very familiar to us. And we are conscious and capable and aware of explaining alternative technologies to get them where they want to be. We don't have all of the tools in our own box, and we work with other people to deliver a total turnkey solution. But it's a consultative role. It is not a case of, here's our portfolio, here's our catalogue, do you want to buy one? Those days, if they ever existed in Inkjet, have long gone. It is much more a case of, tell us what you're trying to do. Our biggest fear is a customer who walks through the door and tells us what bit of technology he wants to buy. That is often fraught with disaster, because he's seen it somewhere and he's decided that's what he wants and that's what he's going to do. It is far better to come with us and say, this is the challenge, there's a problem I've got, and then we work with them to see how we can address that. And if Inkjet, or indeed if our Inkjet isn't appropriate, we'll be the first ones to say, because there's no point in putting white elephants into the market. It doesn't do our reputation any good, and it's certainly not going to help them commercially. So it is very much about stepping back, really analysing the problem in a consultative way, and then making recommendations and mapping out and introducing them to other people as well. If what he wants to do, the technology of putting the ink down could be Inkjet, but actually most of what he's trying to do needs specialist software, either for data management upstream or product management downstream. Then we will involve third parties to be able to say, look, here's a total solution, because his total cost of ownership will often go beyond the bits that we're able to supply. Now, we may become the project manager, or we may work for another project manager to deliver that final solution. But it is, I guess we're moving to the role of being a consultant, a change consultant.
Okay, and Dave Varty, you also have a technical team and an R&D big facility in Telford, so there's a sense to which you really have the support and scale to really support these projects, to bring them to life.
Yeah, we've got a great lab team, mechanical, chemical, electronic engineers, and that gives us confidence to be able to talk to the senior directors or CEOs when they contact us, to be able to say, yes, we can help. But for a long time now, all through my sales career, really, I felt that I'm more of a resource than a salesperson. Somebody wants to do something, that's great. And, as Dave says, if we can't do something, then we'll be honest, but we might know somebody who can. And that was one of the critical things that I think Geoffrey Moore said about forging strong alliances to enable people to move forward into the mainstream. And we work really hard at that with electronics providers, with ink suppliers, anybody in that kind of environment where a customer would need to be able to identify how to be able to implement a project. And that helps to be able to have the discussion with the CEOs, because you're not talking about widgets and gadgets and cost per nozzle or whatever. What you're talking about is somebody who has a strategic intent and then wants a partner to be able to work with who has done all of the hard work in the past. So we can say, actually, yes, we've got a team, we've got some partners, we can direct you, we can help. And we're not being seen as just a printhead provider.
These customers are looking for a solution, and it's a turnkey solution. They're looking for somebody to integrate it. Yeah, they've got a problem. They want a solution. They don't want to buy a product. They want a solution that will work from day one. They don't have the experience, the expertise, or even the resource to put it together themselves.
And that's where you come in, both with your experience and expertise, coupled with your kind of philosophy where it's about the right solution, not just about pushing the product for the sake of it. And then adding underneath all of that, the R&D investment and the technical support that you've got. I think that as a business, that really should assuage any sort of concerns that people have with risk. I mean, you've used the term before, de-risking. And I think that's the key thing as well. Listen, gentlemen, thanks so much. It's really exciting to know that we're finally towards the tornado, the opportunity for Inkjet. I do think there will be an uptick in, you use the word Klondike, that is going to happen. I completely agree. And I think clearly you, with your experience and resources and outlook, can give a really compelling case for partnership going forward. And thank you both so much for joining us and for that very interesting and inspiring conversation.